Well, welcome back to another episode of The Compass. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of play. And Dr. Browse, looking back at some of our YouTube videos that we've done now, almost, I guess, 2 years, 3 years, maybe more of us actually recording these videos. So sometimes we've been a little better at keeping the rhythm than others, but I'm proud of the hard work that we put in. And one of the top videos that we have are actually some therapists that work in your practice that focus on play therapy. I know my cousin watched that video and actually scheduled her daughter to come for an appointment there because they were going through, just some family issues and, a divorce and things like that, that she wanted to bring her to have that opportunity. And it does speak to people's hearts. I would ask you this: why is play a conviction for you in parts of your practice?
Well, I mean, for lots of reasons, because it's so important for kids. I mean, I think the last video we did, we called it, parenting still matters. And some of what I was thinking about this video is play still matters. Just kids having opportunity to play, just to be kids and to play with one another and to play with adults and connect. And, there's a lot of little cliche sayings that, people will have heard.
Yeah.
But there's these nuggets of, part of why those cliches are, everybody kind of knows them, is that there are these nuggets of truth in the reality that, play is the language of children. Play is the work of children. Play, those are the things that are so important about play and what it is. And just like parenting still matters in terms of child development. And that's kind of the theme here for our little just time to talk a little bit. Play matters for child development. Kids that don't have opportunities for healthy play do have developmental struggles. It's not, maybe some of what this is also about, these last time we did a live thing, and this one is also kind of sort of demystifying and depathologizing some things. Like, if you don't, like I said last time, I get really, really defensive for my parents because I see so many of my parents that have been run down and people, just blame the parents and all that. So we dealt with that last time. I'm not blaming the parents and all that. But if a kid grows up and has ineffective parenting, it has real consequences.
Yeah.
And if a kid grows up and has not had opportunity for truly healthy play and a healthy environment for healthy play, it has real consequences. And so I think that's why I feel so passionate about it. It's like it really does make a difference here, in kids' lives. And it doesn't, we should talk a little bit probably about what play is.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to talk about. This is an all-encompassing word. It can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people.
Yes.
So for us to all be on the same page, how would you define it?
Yes. And it's not like I put a lot of time into coming up with a perfect definition of this, but so there's, I'm sure that there's better definitions out there for people to easily pull up. But when I'm talking about healthy play, I'm talking about opportunity for kids to explore their world in a safe and playful, and I realize I'm using the term in my definition of the term, but explore their world in a safe and playful environment. And I think a good example of that is, like, before we went live, you and I were talking just briefly about I think it was a study that you had seen. I wasn't familiar
Yeah,
with.
I actually pulled up two studies. One of them was called The Father-Child Rough and Tumble Play and Regulation of Aggression from the University of Montreal.
Yeah.
And they studied children that had rough and tumble play with their father. And the result was the more balanced, rule-governed, rough play that a child experienced with their father, the better the child later respected stop signals, physical space, and ultimately wasn't aggressive. The second study was in 2019. It was called Tools of the Mind, and they studied kindergartners, and they did one class versus another class. And one class was a play-rich curriculum, and the other one's more of just, they called it business as usual.
Yes.
And the play-based curriculum actually cut down peer ostracism reports in half, and they had reports of significant control. Kids waited their turn, they follow rules, they negotiated with their friends. And so there's a lot of science behind what we're talking about.
Yes, absolutely. And both of those studies reflect what I'm trying to encapsulate in somewhat of an off-the-cuff definition of play. Play is the safe exploration of the world in a joyous environment, in an environment where it's safe to push the boundaries a little bit, and then safely come back or be pulled back. So let's take that first example in that study for a minute. Rough and tumble play. So, everybody has their own physiologic comfort level with rough and tumble play or with being tickled. Some people, from a sensory standpoint, just a little bit of just even to start to approach them, they're like already pulling back or whatever. And other people, you got to really get in there and tickle them and whatever. But to tickle is intrusive. It's pushing a boundary intentionally, but it's doing it in a way that goes, I'm going to push your boundary a little bit, but I'm also going to respect your boundary. That's the playful, like, I'm going to read you accurately when you've had enough.
Yeah.
And I'm going to pull back. And then it becomes this playful movement back and forth. I saw another example of that in terms of what I'm trying to describe. There's this guy, Steve Gross is his name. He's a master's level social worker, I think, and he's developed, he didn't really come at it from the perspective of a therapist, but he's developed play and been a part of developing just ways of integrating kids into safe, healthy environments after disasters like Katrina and various things that he's worked in around.
And the Haiti earthquake, the school shooting in Connecticut.
Yes, exactly. So he's been involved in those kind of things. And there's a video that I saw of him at one point. I can't remember where it was at, but if I'm remembering correctly, it was in a refugee camp. And he has this way of engaging kids, and it's just playful, and he shows interest. He talks about that, like what kids need in healthy play is for adults to, rather than be interesting, adults need to just show interest. And so, but there's this interaction where the kids are all sitting around on the ground, and their feet are put towards the middle, and none of them have shoes on, and they're just they're in this refugee camp. But he's talking, and if I'm remembering correctly, I don't even think he knows their language, but he has this way of engaging, and he reaches over to this one kid that seems to be open to it. This kid kind of seems to be open to it, and just sort of tickles their toes, and they kind of giggle and pull back, but then they put their feet out there again, and he tickles their toes, and they pull back, but then they start laughing. And then you see how slowly around the whole circle, the kids at first are pulling back, and then they start kind of giggling. And then you see how they're sort of nudging their feet towards him, like, okay, tickle my toes next. That's what I mean by safe exploration of their environment in a playful way. There's there's this boundary. They don't know this guy. If I'm remembering correctly in the video, I'm not, like I said, I don't even think he speaks their language. They're in a refugee camp. Like, is this guy safe? Is this guy not? I don't know how they ended up I don't remember how they ended up in the circle, but he's approaching them, and that's play. It's just being.
One of the things he says is that play is the universal language of children.
Absolutely. Play is the universal language of children, and it transcends culture. Like, yes, you have to be culturally sensitive, and he talks about that in some of the material that I've seen of his, and some of the things that I've seen of his. He talks about that. You have to be culturally sensitive, and you have to work with the adults in that culture. In other words, don't come from a completely different culture and then come in and just decide, okay, well, I'm just going to do these great things. I'm going to do these great things for these kids. No, that's not play. Yeah. I'm going to engage with these kids where they're at within their culture. I'm going to help the adults there that know how to play with kids. I'm going to utilize them, and we're going to create this thing. Now, let me get us back on track too, not just to like what he's doing, but play still matters. Play matters at home. Play matters, on the playground. Play matters. It doesn't have to be, these massively organized, with, sports is great, but what we're talking about is something that doesn't have to be, and in many ways needs to not be structured.
Yeah.
It's not structured. It's just showing interest in where kids are at. It's giving kids room and space to explore their world safely, use their imagination, use their creativity, and then and part of what comes to mind is, I know we're covering a lot of broad areas, but play between kids still matters. So really good play. What is the adult's job? The adult's job in the best possible play is to create a safe space for kids to play, a safety net that makes the space safe. The kids may not even know that you have done that, right? I grew up
playing with those VR headsets. You have to outline the boundaries that are invisible.
Yes. Yeah. You're creating a safe environment. You're creating a safe space for kids to play in, and now that will expand. I grew up on a farm, and when I was small, it was probably I felt like I had freedom, but looking back and with my own kids, I did the same thing. With my grandkids, I did the same thing. I see the same thing unfolding. I felt like I had a lot of freedom, but when I was little, my parents weren't but just a few steps from me. But they were doing things, and they were giving me space to explore, giving me space to play with my cousins, my siblings, and we just played. And then as I got older, one of my dad's favorite lines was, "If you can't find something to do on these 50 acres, I'll find it something to do for you." And so,
classic line of that generation.
Yeah, exactly. Classic line of that generation. But what was implied in that was he was creating some boundaries, because those were things that I remember when I was 8, 9, 10. And my cousins and I, were building tree houses and boats to float out on the pond and do all sorts of stuff. Well, we were exploring our world. We were figuring out how to do things, how to build things, how to make things happen. And it was in a safe environment where the adults were the adults were engaged, but it wasn't structured. It wasn't like, okay, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this.
The spontaneity of it is some of the adventure.
Exactly. And then the one other thing I want to bring into this, and again, we could cover so many, each one of these things in detail. But one of the other things that I want to bring in it is another important role of adults in terms of why play matters is, yes, your role as an adult is to create the safe environment for play and let it happen. But there is still time, just like that study indicates, kids need to play with the adults in their world. They need to have that study, like you were talking about, that rough and tumble play with a parental figure. I mean, dad, I think definitely helps. I don't know that it has to be dad, but it needs to be this, rough and tumble play that explores the boundaries. And of course, we could spend a whole video on gender stuff, and we're not going to go there right now. But without going down any of those crazy kinds of, you know what I mean? I'm not, but there's a whole bunch of important stuff down that path. But I can use my own kids and my grandkids as an example. When I'm talking about rough and tumble play, now, we give plenty of room for our daughter to play different than our boys and all that. But we're creating a safe space for them to explore. So my daughter would get together and do things different than the boys would at times. But there are also times that she was out there, man, she was the youngest of two older brothers, and she would come up, claws out, and but she was included in some of that rough and tumble play as she was learning. In that rough and tumble play, you're learning the boundaries of we can push boundaries, we can push ourselves physically, we can push our emotions a little bit, but we can also accurately read one another and know, okay, that's enough. We're pushing the other person too far, and we need to back off. And we're learning that in a safe way through play, which then translates into other situations where it may not be as safe. There may be a real conflict, there may be real risk, there may be real danger or limits that need to be set. Well, you're learning it.
It's like developing that intuition.
That's a great way of putting it. You're developing that intuition in play that then has direct application in lots of other settings, in any kind of interaction with the world. I mean, with human interaction, but any interaction, interaction with the environment, interaction with realizing, oh, wait a minute, if I push this, a little bit further, this tree limb is going to break and I'm going to fall. I mean, literally, building all kinds of crazy tree houses, at 7, 8, and 9, you learned about that. It's like, oh, okay, that's I'm probably pushing the limit there a little bit.
I learned how to use a hammer and not hit my fingers.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
There's a parallel sort of principle that I saw. I was watching a YouTube video of a family, and they were playing a game together where they put these marbles all on a thing, and it races down to the bottom, and every marble is different. And every kid and parent was picking a color, and the youngest kid was really upset because he lost. And then the dad said, well, here's the thing. If somebody wins, it means other people lose. And I thought that that's a really good way to introduce. It's kind of what you're saying is these are life lessons that need to be introduced in safe ways, and teaching you how to process and deal with certain circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way of putting it. And so, play matters, and play matters. Play matters. So probably there's not a lot of 7-year-olds watching this video, but the adults that are watching this video, Your role is to create a safe environment. And then your role is to get down on the floor and spend time with kids and play with them and show interest in their world and interest in their thoughts, interest in their emotions, and your ability, and this is so critical, your ability to accurately gauge and then reflect back to your child their emotions. Like if you're struggling and you're stressed and you're interpreting the child who's trying to be playful and tickle you, but you're interpreting it as that they're being aggressive, you're out of sync with your child.
Yeah.
Now that happens for every parent. And that's probably a clue that you need to step back and regroup and get your emotions in check and then re-engage. If that happens on an ongoing basis, that's going to have serious, no joke, serious negative consequences for your kid's development. So you need to, you need to be in there. You need to play. You need to learn to accurately gauge your child's emotions and reflect those emotions back to your child. And so your child begins to learn about their own emotional world. And,
it's so interesting to me. It's like, I'm thinking about the routes that parents go when they're trying to help their kid process information. And a lot, there's so many times where parents are like, they just don't want to talk about it. Or they won't talk about it. And if that happens enough, they eventually do something like make an appointment with you.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I see happen often is like, let's say a pet dies or there, if an extended family member passes away or something, it's like, they'll take them to get ice cream, or they'll take, they'll try to they'll take them to the water park. They'll get their mind off of it.
Yeah.
Can you juxtapose the difference between doing something like that versus engaging in their world, doing that play? Because it sounds like when you're engaging with play, the stress comes down. You're talking about kids that in Haiti, for example, that their entire world was decimated. There's no food. They've lost every member of their family. There's been genocide anyways. And now there's this massive earthquake. They've never known stability. And then all of a sudden they're sitting in a circle laughing. So like play immediately removed all stress. And then there's this openness to be free. And then actually these emotions are able to be dealt with. Can you just talk about like, what is that? When is the right thing the right thing?
There are definitely times for all of us when we're dealing with really stressful things, loss, traumas, or dealing with really stressful things, that an ice cream cone with a family member or a friend or somebody well-meaning, or an activity that gets our mind off of things and distraction is really helpful. But there are also times like that. That's what I think is important for people to understand is that's the base level. That's like the entry point, is just kind of starting there. But what you're really looking for is you're looking for a playfulness and a genuine interest. And I'm thinking about a fairly young kid who maybe has gone through some stuff and is struggling, and they're not wanting to open up, and you're doing some stuff with them, and maybe you've already taken them out for the ice cream, or you've kind of went on a walk with them, and you've done a few things to get their mind off of it. And then you carve out some time and you just sit down with them, like get down on the floor with them, and you just bring out their toys, bring out some crayons and paper, and you just have this back and forth engagement, and you just let them play, and you see what comes up, and then you connect with them there. They're playing with the little animal figures, and you're noticing what's happening, and you're just watching, and you're finding ways to kind of engage with their little animal, and you see if they pull back from you or if they kind of continue the theme, and you watch and see, do they put emotions into the play theme? Do they put a sad little character over in the corner of the play area? They put a little stuffed animal or something that's over there and slumped over and kind of the classic Eeyore kind of whatever. And then you notice, oh, well, there's this lion that's like just tearing everybody else up. And you think, well, that lion is just being aggressive and mean. But if you start watching it, you realize that the lion is protecting the little Eeyore in the corner. And you start going, oh, now this is all just play. This is just, you're just creating safety for the child to play. But play is the language of kids. And so you're just listening, and you're not saying, oh, Johnny, I noticed that part over there is sad. I bet you're feeling sad. I mean, at some point down the road, you might say that, but play isn't that. Play is just joining Johnny in the play, and your little figurine starts to go over to that part, and the lion eats you, and then you back off and you get another figurine and you go, hey, Mr. Lion, what's going on? What are you so upset about? I was wondering about that guy over there. What's going on with him? And you're just, plays the language of kids, man, so you're just engaged in play. And there's this back and forth, and there's this genuine interest. It's like, man, what is coming out of your little brain and your little emotions and your little thoughts? What's coming out right now in this play scene? I am genuinely interested, and I want to create as much safety as I can for all of that to just come out. Yeah.
Wow, that's really good. We don't really have time to discuss it today, but I saw another sort of Instagram video. So who knows its accuracy?
Right.
Not accurate at all. But it said, like 50% of the population's emotionally frozen between 8 to 12 years old. And I don't know if it's that high, but there certainly is a percentage there. So I'm like, can you take a grown adult through play into play and walk them through that and help unwire some of that? And maybe that's not the right response, but that's what I was thinking of when you're saying that, because it is so applicable. These are tools in a tool belt for parents and, like you said, well-meaning people to cultivate and to sharpen and to get better at. And the concept that you mentioned about being interested and not interesting, I think is so important.
Yeah.
When you're in situations like if you have a child that has parents that have been divorced, a lot of times I've seen the one who doesn't have custody most of the time will try to woo their kid with stuff or things or ideas or this cool concept, but the kid just wants to be seen as interested in, not know what is interesting about this parent.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah, and that creates a whole host of problems. I mean, because any kid worth their salt's going to figure out how to manipulate parents to get fun stuff. And so if one parent is just being the party parent, and not really doing the harder work of parenting, then you're just facilitating something incredibly superficial in your relationship with the child, as opposed to creating a deeper environment for safe play, like being engaged with them and doing fun stuff, but you're creating a deeper environment for the kind of play that I was just describing. Then you're not just being the party parent, you're creating a deeper environment where you are really truly expressing genuine interest in your child. Hugely important.
Yeah. Well, this has been a very fascinating conversation. Are there any final thoughts that you want to add?
It's like the theme that we talked about last time. Parenting, really still matters. Play still matters. I mean, there's a lot we could go down that path, but yeah, I think we've covered a lot of things, like, just create safe space for your kids to play, get down on the floor and play with them, do stuff with them, engage with them in things that they're interested in. Yeah, and that's the main thing.
Well, that's good. Thank you, everybody, for watching. You can call 573-334-7055 to make an appointment, or you can visit us online at bradrobinsonmd.com. This has been another episode of The Compass, and we'll be back again pretty soon.